Welcome to the Worry Free Podcast by Event Resources. I'm Lee Simmons. At your event, how are your guests sitting? Is it a dinner, so are they at round tables? Are they taking notes, so are they at banquet tables? Maybe there's no tables at all and they're sitting what we call theater-style seating. The room layout is something to think about in terms of your event and the guest experience and also the capacity of the room. And that is our topic for today. Joining me for that discussion is Event Resources' Billy Montgomery. Billy, this is a topic that may seem a little overlooked, maybe. Why is it important to think about?
We always say that we want to approach things from the guest experience point of view. We want to think on behalf of not just our client, but our client's attendees. So that's extremely important to know how the room is going to be arranged and how the event is going to flow.
So let's break down some of these different arrangements in the room. And let's start with rounds, usually a little more typical for the types of events that we do with galas and fundraisers, et cetera. So people are seated at rounds. Tell us more about that.
So there's some pros and some cons to it. I think one of the major pros is people are able to network and communicate at their table, maybe meet some new people, again, largely for networking. One of the cons to it, though, is that people might still be chit-chatting when you're trying to get your program rolling.
And the size of the tables themselves take up a lot of space. So how's that factor?
Yeah, so, if you have an event with several hundred attendees, let's say 700 attendees, that's a lot of tables. That takes up a huge amount of space. And so you want to make sure that the venue that you're in will actually be able to accommodate that.
And I think that's an important thing when figuring out layouts. One thing we're starting to do more of is having a 3D layout that's to scale, so we can place the tables in there so the event planners can see that how much space these tables are taking within the room. Want to tell us a little bit about that?
Exactly. And I think one of the most important things that you just said is to scale. Because we've seen some programs where things aren't exactly to scale, and it's a misrepresentation of what the space actually is. Another thing that you may not think about is the space that's between tables, but then also the other things that are in the room that aren't the tables. You know, is there a stage? Is there projection screens? Is there pipe and drape? A tech table maybe?
Talking about the tables as well, let's help the event planners understand how many people can actually sit at the tables.
Sure. So most commonly we'll see 72-inch round tables, 6 feet across, and you can fit 10 to 12 people per table. Might be a little bit of a squeeze, but then the next size down we see are 60-inch round tables, and typically 8 to 10 people at those. But that's not the end-all, be-all, right? Sometimes you might also want people sitting in crescent, so they're all facing the same direction.
Tell us a little more about that. Some people might not know the term crescents.
Sure. So if we're looking at this table in front of us as part of the presentation, you'd only have people sitting on one side. So you get 6, 7 people at a 72-inch round, where you typically get 10 to 12 for dinner all the way around.
So they're all facing...
They're all facing the stage.
No one getting their back to it. And that's an important topic, too. Again, depending how many guests you have, how many tables you have, sometimes you have to do rounds because you just can't fit them if all in crescents.
Right.
That might be the goal, but when you draw it out and realize we can't fit that many people, they might have to be in rounds. And if not, well, then you have the luxury where you could do crescents and no one's back is to that. Those are bigger round tables. Are there options of smaller round tables too?
There are. We do what we refer to as comedy club style. So it's a smaller table, typically only about 4 seats per table, and more tightly packed in like you would find in a comedy club.
All right, let's move on to theater-style seating.
Sure.
Let's explain a little more of what that is and then how that plays into different events.
So theater-style seating is basically seating without tables, all aligned in a certain way for the viewer, optimized just to be watching what's happening on stage or what's the main presentation. It doesn't have to just be straight lines. It can be chevron style, what we call. Some are straight and some are angled. We can do it in the crescent or half round. The goal is all to have the viewer facing the stage.
And what are some pros and cons of using theater style seating?
Sure. So the pros are you've optimized seating because you've cut out the tables so you can fit a lot more seats in the room. Another pro is depending on how you have your seats angled, it can help with viewer fatigue. That being said, there is a little bit more of viewer fatigue when you don't have anything in front of the guests, anything for them to do, dinner or a table for taking notes or anything like that. If they're just sitting there watching, you're going to burn your people out a little bit faster.
I mean, that's good. It's a point that a shorter presentation, theater style, might fit great, but if you have any kind of meal, any kind of notes that are being taken, that might be a challenge, right?
Exactly.
What about aisles too? Something that I have had conversations with where, well, why can't we just line up 50 chairs in a row? Why is that not a good idea?
So let's imagine we're in a movie theater, right? And you've got tickets dead center. Yeah, it's the best viewing spot, but you've got to scooch past 10, 12, 13 people, 15 people, 50 people, however many it is. And my bad, sorry. That gets old pretty quick. Typically, we don't like to go more than 10 seats before an aisle break, just because you're scooching past all those people. With a row of 10 coming in from either side, you're only moving past 5.
And that goes back to the guest experience, right?
Of
We don't
course.
want them having a bad experience when they're trying to get in and out of their seat to go to the bathroom or go get a drink, whatever it may
Exactly.
be.
Now, can I cut you off there? Something else that we've done, which is slightly different, that helps to alleviate that and viewer fatigue, is we've done seating in groups.
Yeah, tell us.
So it's not just in lines. We do multiple events where people are coming from different departments or different companies to come in, and they'll have 20, 30, 40 people in their group. And so we've done seating arrangements to accommodate those size groups while still keeping aisles, while still keeping all the seats pointed to the middle of the stage, but keeping them slightly separated in their own. And again, it's reducing the amount of seats before break.
Some events have very small meetings, 20 people or so. What different arrangements on the seating can we do in that scenario where maybe they don't want rounds, maybe they don't want theater, it's more of a conversation? What other arrangements can we do in that situation?
So for something that small, we would typically do something like a U-shaped style, where they have the tables on 3 sides, and it's really just the front row of tables. Maybe there's another row or 2 behind them, but it's all facing into the middle, and it's a little bit more intimate.
Some events aren't sit-down dinners, obviously. Maybe it's a cocktail reception or something like that. Let's talk a little about what that arrangement is with the tables, and in those scenarios, should we still have some seating?
Yeah, so for a cocktail party, you don't necessarily put a set number of people per table, especially if it's a high top without seats to it, right? You could have 6, 8 people standing around a cocktail table having a discussion, networking, being part of the conversation, whereas if it was seated, you'd only really get 4 people to that table. That being said, it is extremely important to make sure that there is seating for those that just can't stand for those long periods of time. I mean, for some people, it's not physically possible to do that, and it's important to take that into consideration.
And I think that gets overlooked at times because often event planners might think of what they envision for the event, but have to also remember what type of guests are there coming. Are there any health issues? Are there any older guests? Things like that. So the type of event might give you that answer to know, geez, should we have any seating? Should we have a lot of seating? Some seating?
Well, and then there's also the fluke of like, so-and-so broke their foot and they just aren't as mobile, or they can't stand for long periods of time. I think it's something that is very important to take into consideration.
Great. Billy, thank you for this discussion, and thank you for tuning in to the Worry Free Podcast. We hope this information was valuable when you are planning your next event to ensure that your guests have a good experience and are comfortable when being at your event. Again, thanks for watching the Worry Free Podcast by Event Resources. I'm Lee Simmons.